Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about cloud computing, including cloud native and hybrid cloud. We're looking at the evolution of the cloud and also where it's headed in the future. To talk about that, I'm joined by Dan Griffith, Director, Cloud Native Advisory and Solutions at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Dan, happy Friday to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, James. It's great to be able to join and looking forward to some good conversation.
Great. I think it's really interesting because, you've been a cloud professional about as long as cloud has been a serious concern in the enterprise since about 2013. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but what have you seen about cloud's evolution that has surprised you?
So, yeah, quite a few things.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah, but originally, it's funny. I, came to sort of cloud architecture and infrastructure from a more traditional infrastructure background, but happened to cut my teeth at a couple of managed service providers back in the early aughts, right? So,
Hmm.
like 1999 to 2005, 2006,
Hmm.
and we were trying to deliver um, really desktops as a service
Hmm.
to
Right.
small medium market enterprises back in the first startup prior even to VMware. So
Hmm.
I will, just because of the timing, was able to see how much of an advantage we had when we were able to leverage abstraction to get the operating systems abstracted from the hardware, right? And that was like the big stick that VMware swung that got them to something close to universal adoption in their heyday.
Right. Right.
Um, but having and so I spent many years sort of focused on virtualization for after the managed service providers taking that model to enterprises,
Hmm.
and in the course of doing that, doing due diligence, was hearing more and more sort of chatter, both inside and outside sort of VMware channels on AWS.
Hmm.
And just on my own, late 2011, early 2012, started a subscription and started playing around, and
Hmm.
had one of those, aha, OMG, this is at least as big as VMware, has been and is
Oh, sure.
probably going to eat the world, right? So,
Right.
and part of the, the realization came because AWS, in general, and cloud computing in particular, solved a lot of the challenge that we ran into as a managed service provider in being
Hmm.
able to run fast and scale, and then operate reliably all simultaneously, right?
Hmm.
Because there's so much that you can do, um, in terms of the limitations of technology we had at hand, and
Hmm.
seeing that AWS, I mean, it was such an elegant solution to abstract away the hypervisors and put APIs in front of them, that
Right.
I pretty sure I did a couple of Picard level face palms, that someone had figured this out, in a way that we had never, we just hadn't thought of, right? And
Right.
so that part wasn't necessarily, the infrastructure as a service wasn't surprising, because I'd sort of been working on as a service problems for a while,
Hmm.
um, but the degree to which abstracting with APIs, the
Hmm.
impact that had, people appreciated it at the time. I don't know that anybody, especially early on, appreciated just how fundamental a change that was going to bring.
Hmm.
Right. So that's been the big one. And then, um, cloud native has also been surprising, in the core. I joined, Cloud Technology Partners, after I had a cloud architect gig, and a couple of consulting, and then joined on because CTP at the time, prior to the acquisition, were pretty much the best, professional services game in town
Hmm.
when it came to sort of cloud agnostic, cloud consulting.
Hmm.
And after joining with them, I got the opportunity to work with Docker early on.
Hmm.
I think early
Wow.
2015,
Okay.
and had another aha, facepalm moment. Oh, heck,
Containers.
these folks have figured out. Okay, so we can abstract the VMs, away from the hypervisors. Now they're abstracting the workloads away from the VMs or from the operating system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's gonna open up, a whole new set of options and a higher level of automation and composing environments as code than even VMs on infrastructure as a service could. And didn't really know where that would lead, other than that it was going to be super attractive just from the economics of it by themselves, the ability to move so fast.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah.
the thing that was really surprising though was, at the time I became somewhat of a container evangelist, but no one, I don't think, in early 2015 outside of Google had any idea what the impact that Kubernetes was going to have, right? Because you almost would have to have been hands-on with it at Google to
Right.
appreciate the challenges that it solved for.
And now it seems like Kubernetes and container technology is pretty much swept through the industry. I mean, the thing that surprised me, if I go back to 2013 and ride in a time machine, is that there was a sense back then that, oh, cloud is going to eat everything and cloud's going to make the data center go away. Oh, these dinosaurs called the data center. It turns out here we are in 2022. The data center is still very much alive. I mean, that prediction did not come true at all. Cloud has not killed the data center after all.
No, it's probably, I think it's fair to say that for net new development, right? Again, without a total greenfield, the default choice is generally going to be public cloud. But even in those scenarios, we see customers who will do net native development, even all the way up to maybe UAT, and then bring it back. If it's going to be, if the workload has certain characteristics, if the services are generally, not scaling in and out all that often, they do have, sort of a high reliance on data exchange, both input and output, or there's some other kind of compliance requirement. We'll see them bring the production workloads and run them on premises, and then that sort of opens up the question of, well, how do I have mostly identical or identical enough environments to be able to do that across two different platforms, right? And that is really sits square in our definition of hybrid cloud.
Well, I know currently you're focused on cloud native, among other versions of cloud. It seems that obviously there's a lot of advantages there. It's faster, it's more efficient. What is your sense of companies' adoption of cloud native? It seems like there's a sense of we like it, but it's too expensive up front. We're not sure. We're still doing lift and shifts. And how is cloud native doing in terms of its adoption and its work with companies?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I do subscribe to your channel. I don't know that I've seen anyone who's talked to the CNCF survey, the most recent one, which identified a couple of really interesting things. Kubernetes is over 90, something like 96% penetration among the survey respondents, and they've grown in developer population. It's grown just in year over year, 20 to 21. From almost 4 million to more than 5.5 million developers who are using Kubernetes. Right. And
all right, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. And now why isn't it faster? I think about the effort it took to scale, 60+% in developers who have the expertise to effectively use, basically a brand new set of technologies and a new delivery model. That is to me, that is the biggest choke point, the biggest pain point right now, is there is such a massive skills gap between what enterprises would like to do at the speed they would like to do it, and just finding folks who can actually help them. It's a talent shortage, a massive really gap. Oh, an incredible talent shortage. One of the most challenging projects that I did while at CTP actually was not customer facing at all, was not any kind of cloud implementation, is I ran our recruiting and onboarding for specifically for cloud architects and developers for
Hmm.
a year and a half,
Okay.
and that was singularly challenging. And this was late 2018 through 2019 into early, basically up till the pandemic,
Okay.
right? And finding folks, just folks who really have chops and experience. They're working. they are
Right.
they
They have a
are
job already.
yeah, they have jobs and they have an inbox full of offers, right?
Right.
So we really need to grow. This needs to be a sort of hyper organic growth, because we can't just keep. You can already see from the salaries what happens when we keep the same folks keep chasing the same pool of talent.
Hmm.
um, but one of the encouraging things that I see, and one of the ways that the HPE generally, and I think a lot of the CNCF sort of sponsors and the CNCF community has advocated for,
Hmm.
is it in possibly the most inclusive um, set of teams that I've ever seen.
Hmm.
And you could just look at the roster of a recent KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, or the one that any of the ones that are happening this year, and
Hmm.
it is. There's nothing wrong with folks who look like us, James, but there's a lot of folks. There's a lot more folks, a lot more diverse of a population
That's
in sort
great.
of that
Yeah.
IT segment than I see
Yeah.
in most others, and that's awesome.
Right. Right. It is really wonderful. Um, you talk about developers and cloud native, and obviously some of the by that 90% figure, I'm hearing that. So the developers have gotten on board. What about the companies themselves? Of course, they're hiring the developers, but are the companies themselves saying, "Oh no, we really want to embrace cloud native," or is it still not necessarily?
I think companies are feeling the pull from their development organizations, whether that's in-house or whether that's third party, right? On a lot
Mhm.
of our engagements, the first managed Kubernetes that we might set up in an AWS or an Azure is specifically because a development team or a vendor who's contracted as a third party,
Mhm.
that is sort of their platform of choice, and they would not be able to execute on their timeframes, and on the value they're supposed to deliver unless they're able to utilize Kubernetes. And then that puts enterprise infrastructure in a position of, okay, we need to adopt this new mode, and it's a, as you can imagine, a very significant change,
Right.
not just technology but across people and processes as well. And that's it gets lumped in sort of with the generic digital transformation,
Hmm.
but from it, just from an infrastructure practitioner standpoint, this is one of the most acute, sort of inflection points and changes that's being asked of infrastructure. Is just as significant, and I believe more complex than moving from hardware to virtualization was.
Oh, it's really that big a change. It's not. It's not a sort of an evolution change. It's somewhat almost of a revolution change, closer to.
Yes, because in essence, what one of the greatest benefits, and why might a development outfit choose Kubernetes rather than going against VMs when it's on the same cloud service provider.
Mhm.
If you're developing containerized applications, um, you are only going to realize the full power of containers if you are using cloud native APIs, and Kubernetes provides that best set of cloud native APIs that also takes care of a whole bunch of the undifferentiated heavy lifting and plumbing that has to go on behind the scenes to run containers at scale and do that orchestration. Those are the lessons. That was the problem set Google was trying to solve when it came up
Mhm.
with Borg in the first place,
Hmm.
and why they got 8 years of a head start on most everyone else, and why Kubernetes, I think, took off so quickly when they did finally compose an open source project out of Borg and name it Kubernetes, and then start a foundation to house it.
Mhm. So, all right, there's all these companies out there. They're working with their cloud native deployment. They're into it. If they're struggling, what advice would you give to clients? Say, this is at least one thing you want to think about in terms of optimizing your cloud native development deployment.
Yeah, so CTP had a lot of a lot of experience doing that over the years, and
Hmm.
you know some of the sort of mantras that we had, and some of them have to, can be applied more generically to any sort of change, either in IT or sort of organizational change generally. But starting small and iterating,
Mm.
the crawl, walk, run mantra,
Hmm.
that we've seen, you can do big splash, but and we've helped companies who've gone big splash, either like a data center exit with a sharp timeline, that
Hmm.
that pretty much necessitates a particular approach. But if you have the option, sort of getting yourself on your skis instead of over your skis,
Hmm.
always good advice. The and part of how you can do that, don't build it if you can buy it. There's
Mm. Hmm.
the amount of services that are available. I mean, just year over year, the improvements and additions to the PaaS and SaaS kind of services offered by a CSP are just, it's astounding, right? It's not
Hmm.
astounding when you see how much they invest,
You're
but
right.
because there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes. But there, when you have the ability to leverage that, unless there is some other overriding, mostly a business consideration, there you building something yourself, on top of a cloud provider instead of consuming what they have. You know, there are reasons to do that, and we might get into that later. But for the most part, unless you know what those reasons are, then start with the assumption that it's much better to just consume something like RDS rather than run your own databases. Um,
Right.
and in that way, you also get to, we always preach maximizing the CSP's responsibility
Hmm.
under what they show as a shared responsibility model.
Hmm.
So let them do all the grunt work, right?
Right.
Let
Well,
them
that's what they're there for. Yeah.
let them do blocking and tackling, so your dev teams can be out making the highlight reel, right? And that's
Hmm.
generally, again, you, to the extent that you can buy it, just don't try to build it. And
Right.
then both of those things sort of also enable or sort of drive you in a direction where you should be automating everything and always. And
Hmm.
the cloud platform, and it sounds elemental to those of us who've been in it for a while, but I still find myself in these conversations. The cloud platform itself is a software product. It is software. It is software that composes it and makes it up. You cannot go and push a blinking, push a button to turn a blinking light off. That's not going to happen,
Right.
um, in any kind of cloud native environment. So you want to be able to deploy, basically treat it like a software product, follow the mature SDLC approaches that have been out in the
Hmm.
development world for a good while now. And on top of that, I strongly advise in managing this software product, use agile or lean Kanban, use a modern approach to project management as well.
Hmm. That's because I particularly like the piece about don't build it if you can buy it. I think that people do need to hear that. To kind of wrap it up, I'd love to get a sense of your view of the future of cloud native. I mean, what should companies know, and how can they prepare now? And what is your take?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit about the skills gap. That is,
Right.
again, that is what I think is the most significant challenge. And not to toot our own horn, but it is,
Hmm.
one of the reasons for HP's pretty well publicized pivot to edge to cloud as a service
Hmm.
is a recognition that enterprises really need a lot of help in this
Mm.
area. And they can't just find, go to any number of vendors and find third parties that are, that have the kind of expertise and skills to do this at an enterprise level. It's just, there's way too much complexity to be able to do that. And it's, it's part of the reason why HPE acquired CTP, and several, almost all of the acquisitions in that arena have been targeted and are, if you sort of align them on a spectrum, they are hitting areas where there is really acute need for that enterprises have for help in kind of realizing the potential of cloud and cloud native. And I think that the ecosystem's the cloud native ecosystem is going to continue to mature and grow. And if you, a lot of times I like to talk about the open source community, the CNCF and sort of that whole Kubernetes ecosystem and the CSPs, they are really mutually reinforcing. Innovation in one almost instantly gets pulled in to the other, who then iterates and innovates on top, which then gets pulled back. And they're really like two engines that are they're simultaneously driving this huge train, right? With more and more cars jumping on all the time, but the train keeps going faster.
It is going to be an interesting train to watch in the years ahead, no doubt. Dan, I think you said it. Very much appreciate you sharing your expertise today. Thank you very much.
Hey, it was great to talk to you, James. Really appreciate it.